A lot has changed since I first gave my opinion on ring fencing the Premiership, and when I say a lot, I mean a lot. Like Jesus, we've been through a lot. I mean, I've had at least a couple mental breakdowns in that time, but the passage of time in isolation has given us all time to reflect and re-evaluate on the state of things. In my case, it was the English Rugby Premiership. So when I last talked about my opinion on whether I thought ring fencing was a good idea or not, the rugby world was a very different place. Back then I was very much against it due to the effect it would have on competition towards the end of the season and having every game still mean something. As a spectator, it was a priority to me. It would affect my enjoyment of the on-field product. But the current global pandemic has affected everyone in the world financially, apart from Jeff Bezos it seems. But our global crisis has revealed that our beautiful game is even more financially fragile than we initially thought it was, and our rugby pyramid structure in this country may not currently be in the best interests of the future of the game, which is unfortunate. Because I believe league structures with promotion and relegation, despite them being extremely cruel, add so much value to the quality of the drama in the sport. The amount of jeopardy in a sporting situation always brings tension, drama, suspense, and all that other good stuff with it. That's why the World Cup and Lions Tours are bloody brilliant. It's all on the line, all or nothing, success or failure depending on the finest margins, on the biggest stage in the world. And that's what makes sport, in my opinion, one of the few things in society that's almost completely truthful. Obviously, off the field there are mitigating factors like money and resources, but once you get on the field, it's just about who's better on the day. And the closest thing, in my opinion, you can get to fair, I guess, which you could see as reflected in the way we approach European league structures in things like football and pro rugby in France and England. But, like I said, things have changed quite a lot, and at the moment I don't think our club game is robust enough to have the luxury of an almost capitalist structure, let's say, which I'm a little conflicted on, but I'll get to that in just a second. But one of the silver linings that came out of Saracen's current situation was that we learned what a ring-fence league would look like, with the London club being already relegated to the Championship for the majority of the season. And a lot of the jeopardy and drama of the league was sort of swiftly taken away. However, what this did highlight was the fact that relegation battles weren't really a dial mover in terms of bringing in new or lapsed fans to the game. In my opinion, I now believe what it did do was bring another big game to the league in the final weekends of the season, which is good TV, I guess, but the double-edged sword of it would be that big game would be usually between two teams who wouldn't generally have the star power to carry that big game energy, if that makes sense. Of course the fans of the teams playing would show out, but usually teams playing in those kind of relegation battle games would be big clubs, which is a dumb phrase, but unfortunately I can't think of a more apt one. And if you're thinking Leicester Tigers this year or Northampton when they got relegated, I believe those are outliers and not the norm. So once a relegation battle was taken away from the league, we were just left with a race for top four and the rugby. Well, Saracen's relegation took the pressure off a lot of clubs in this league. They didn't have to worry about that horrible relegation ghost chasing them all year. So what happened is what happens a lot of the time towards the end of the season when a team is officially relegated from the league early. Teams started to play more freely and more expansively. Teams know they're not going down, so they might as well try and play to win and give their fans something to cheer about, rather than playing not to lose. I believe the same thing happened when London Welsh got promoted in the 2014-15 season. Welsh not really being at the level necessary to compete, and everyone knowing basically that they're not going down, led to a very free and high-scoring league season, which aided the success of Bath that year in my opinion, due to everyone being a bit more loose in attack and defence, which allowed their extremely expansive game to flourish and got them to the final, where unfortunately for them they underperformed and lost ironically against the only team in the league that year who remained pragmatic all year and were defensively focused. I may have stumbled onto something there. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that the on-field product throughout the season was way more entertaining to watch, and the race for the top four was way more entertaining because everyone who was in the hunt was at a similar level, except Exeter, who remained dominant, but they just built themselves up the right way, just another level of consistency and ruthlessness. And you might be thinking, well, that's all well and good, but we have leagues in rugby that don't have relegation, and they both have flaws. You have the Celtic League, which never seems to have the star players playing unless it's a big game against another big team, or in Leicester's case, they can throw out a second team and still kill it. Furthermore, in that league, you have teams that are just existing and getting pumped every week and not really being competitive, which is just No fun for anyone involved. Then you have Super Rugby, which I think stumbled onto something with Super Aotearoa and how good that competition was, due to it being focused and not having the conferences and over-bloating, with teams floating in and out of competition and ultimately devaluing the league. Hot take alert. But they will never act on it due to it basically cutting the legs out from underneath an already battered and bruised Australian Rugby Union, as well as South Africa. By my opinion, I think South Africa would be alright if they did a similar thing with their Curry Cup teams, because that comp is lit. However, I believe I have the answer to all of those queries, my students of the NGJ School for Gifted Rugsters. So, first point about the inflation of franchises and devaluing the league with teams that either aren't competing or new franchises that don't have the following to make a difference. I hear you, but when I'm talking about ring fencing, I'm talking about getting all of the teams who genuinely have the facilities and ambitions to come into the Premiership and compete. Apologies that I haven't mentioned that yet. But it would be teams like Newcastle, Ealing, maybe Jersey Reds, because there are a lot of teams that genuinely don't want to go into the Premiership, even if they won the Championship, for either competition reasons or having to relocate and move a lot of stuff around to meet the Premiership's requirements. Now, I understand this would prevent stories like the magical story of Exeter, and to that I have no answer. It sucks and it's not fair, but that's the reality of the situation. Now, to all the other points, I'm bloody bullproof. Second point, the star players issue in the Celtic League I think would be eradicated due to new teams coming into the league. You could shorten the regular season and extend the postseason. Let me explain. Have players play each other only one time in the regular season instead of twice, which would take the amount of games played in the Premiership from 22 to around 13 or 14, which would be massive for player welfare, the thing everyone talks about but don't really care about. Furthermore, that increases the value of winning dramatically. You only have 13 games a year maybe to get what you want, so you have to play your best team most weeks. It makes every game count. Big game energy everywhere. But without relegation hindering creativity, and this is very much wishful thinking on my part, I understand, but I think it would lead to teams being a lot more experimental. I believe you'd see a lot more different styles of playing, but maybe I'm a dreamer. Now, the reason I would extend the postseason is because that's the bit that matters, and that's the bit that people really care about. The final of the Premiership is always a massive deal with people showing up, no matter really who's playing, and we always have big games in the Premiership that are just league games that will be played at Twickenham that will get incredible attendances. So instead of a top 4, you could do a top 6 just as an example, or you could instead have a top 4 postseason series. Test series are one of my favourite things in rugby. Imagine a best of 3, at least one home game and one away game, with higher league position affecting who played home first, and if it went to 3, the higher team would be where the decider would be played. It would be a madness, cause in rugby you can win the odd game as a lesser team, but to win a series is an incredibly hard task. The possibilities and dramatic jeopardy would be endless. If a finalist team won 2 straight and the other finalist team didn't and had to play a third game to get over the hump, they'd be at a disadvantage, with the first team having an extra week off like in the NBA. Furthermore, if you had your league position affect home advantage, then that would make the regular season matter even more. And to anyone saying, well, that makes the regular season pointless, we already have a league where finishing first doesn't mean you win. You could keep the top 6 play in the Champions Cup aspect, but most teams would only play a max of 13-14 games, and then you could have the same all or nothing final where you get 70,000 peeps down to Twickenham in an ideal world. And I get it, this is very wishful thinking, but at least a watered down form of what I'm saying makes sense. Now, my third and fourth points lead nicely on from that, because I do firmly believe that less regular season games would make the competition that much better, and not like the Celtic League is, because there's a lot more money in the Premiership and therefore a lot more depth of competition, with squads having a lot more depth in terms of quality due to the individualistic nature of the league, because unlike in the Celtic League there aren't any players on central contracts. Furthermore, I believe people are more likely to invest more heavily in sports teams without the fear of relegation. I believe it was Howard Steinbrenner, the owner of the New York Yankees, who was once asked about whether he would invest in a Premier League football team, and his response was simple, and his reasons even simpler. He said no, because why would he as a businessman ever invest in something that had the risk of getting relegated? Now, I doubt me and this man with the most old money American name I've ever heard have much in common. However, I do believe If the explanation is extremely simple and it makes sense immediately, you should probably take some stock into that answer, because its explanation just sums it up perfectly. That's how business works, and that's how most wealthy people like him think. It's simple, black and white. The English and the French League aren't like the Celtic League. They're a lot more palatable as a business opportunity to invest in, simply due to the amount of people in the countries. Scotland, Ireland, Northern Ireland and Wales have all been overachieving since the dawn of rugby time. There are more people in London than there are in Scotland, Wales and both Irish countries combined. And the populations affect the amount of players available, affect the amount of fans and the potential for growth. And even then, most rugby clubs in England operate at a loss. The impact all these other countries have had on rugby worldwide, considering their resources, is astonishing. But that's the difference. The Premiership needs to capitalise on what we have and secure the future of the game in this country by making the Premiership the most appealing competition in the world to get involved in. We have been throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks for too long. The world is becoming an even more ruthless place business-wise. We need to be flexible. Survival needs to be the priority in this moment, and we can figure out the kinks later. Now, I want to pivot slightly. I mentioned the NBA briefly as an example of another sports league, and that's actually what brought me to wanting to make this video in the first place. As I've become more and more of a fan of the NBA, and of their product, I've seen the way the league is run, and not everything about what they do business-wise is applicable, but a couple things struck me and that I think are interesting. First of all, it's basically a socialist league. The very oversimplified concept of its economy, let's say, is if you have a bad season, you get to be put in with a chance of getting the best youngster leaving university or sometimes high school. And if you're doing well, it's the opposite. It's built to give struggling teams, or franchises as they say, future stars to build around. Now, I'm definitely not suggesting we adopt a policy like that, as it's definitely not perfect, and it would take a whole new video to explain the intricacies of it, but it's interesting that the mindset is very much a rising tide raises all ships, which leads me on to the other thing that struck me, which was that the mindset of how the NBA is run is the league is the priority. So that mindset of the league being successful and the main focus leads to a system where there's a reason to watch the lower teams. The fans of those teams have something and someone to give them hope. And the obvious reason for that being of incredible importance is that leads to better attendance and more eyeballs on the product, e.g. more money and financial security. So I believe that in this country, maybe a change in mindset and priority may be pivotal in helping us save the game in this country, secure the future, prioritise the league's success, and try and mould it into something that people like myself can get emotionally invested in. Maybe rebranding is the answer, I don't know. I'm just a bloke who thought he only had 5 minutes worth of things to say about this, but it turns out I clearly feel very passionately a certain way. But I think that's because you don't have to be a movie reviewer to know a movie's crap, and you don't need to be a genius to know something needs to change. Anyway, that's all. I hope you enjoyed, and if you like this, please subscribe to see what else I have to offer. Stay safe. Signed, NGJ.